Good morning. We are in California, looking for the heart of the American sense of humor. It looks like we may have found it. There it is. In 2018, this dude named John Gilmore wrote a book called Satire, the New Idiom, and he articulates himself much better than I could, so I'll be drawing from him pretty heavily for the next little bit. He touches on a lot of the difficulties that the genre poses to people who make satire or consume satirical works. He argues that satire is only effective if it's perceived by the audience to be that way, and even when we may be willing to accept that certain things are satire, we can run into some trouble when we try to figure out what those different things have in common. What is the chairness of satire? What is satire in the realm of forms? Even when satire is obviously satire, like with Borat, Gilmore points out that it's not unreasonable to be concerned that some people might not get the joke, but still find the thing funny as they take it literally.
Oh my god, it's so funny because funky foreigners, they're so goofy, it's hilarious!
Gilmore argues that satirists aim to persuade their audience to look at their target in a particular way, and as such, satire can be seen at times as socially conservative, and when it is, it's usually functioning to mock those who are thought to be getting above themselves. So satire is a tricky thing. It's a potent vehicle for communicating certain ideas because you can bring to light some criticism of a thing while keeping the conversation fairly lighthearted, but understanding the satirist's intended message can be challenging, owing in part to its elusive definition, and also we don't have anything resembling a schema that we can apply to figure out whether or not some transgressive humor has failed or succeeded. We have to approach these things on a case-by-case basis while being as nuanced as we possibly can in doling out and receiving criticism. That's also why I can't get behind perspectives like this.
Comedy with an agenda is not comedy, because it's not meant to make people laugh, it's meant to make people agree.
Yeah.
Because, everyone has an agenda. That's not a bad thing either. Like subjectivity, I think it can hinder you when you try to act like you can transcend it like some omnipotent god. But the idea of comedy that's not trying to say something or make an argument confuses me. What the hell are you doing this for, if not to politicize something that the rest of us overlook? Actually, because satire is inherently critical, I'd argue that it's one of the most political artistic mediums at our disposal. The satirist faces the added problem of ensuring they aren't reiterating precisely the thing that they're aiming to critique. Borat as a film is obviously meant to make a mockery of racists. But if some hypothetical person out there doesn't think the people being exposed are racist, then we're stuck with a situation where we're now having to consider the ways that Borat as a satire is doing the exact thing that it's aiming to break down. On my Facebook feed, ooh, this is gonna be spicy, isn't it? A satirical political commentator named Jonathan Pie has shown up exactly twice. On one hand, my leftist friend who's always sharing content about harm reduction and confronting racism and saving cats found something to her taste in Jonathan Pie's video. On the other, this dude who made his own satirical short film about a literal secret cabal of feminists plotting to ruin Star Wars, no, I'm not exaggerating or joking, also found something to his taste in Jonathan Pie. How can two people with such disparate views on politics unite under the work of one political commentator? Lindsay Ellis has a really great video about Mel Brooks' approach to satire in his films, and in reference to an episode of the Revisionist History podcast, she points out that people who hold beliefs that are antithetical to one another can still be drawn to the same satirist, but they only take the work as intended if their beliefs are already aligned with that of the satirist. So when Jonathan Pie, made and played by Tom Walker, by the way, appeals to two totally different political perspectives, what's happening is something that a satirist should anticipate. People are taking the satirist's work in and receiving their perspective in accordance with their own personal biases. And while individual artists can't be expected to account for every possible way that their text can be misinterpreted, I draw the line at instances where someone has deliberately and explicitly lied, or where, out of negligence, they validated a lot of people's biases by spreading false information, and then proceeded to excuse themselves because they did a satire, and satire grants us the Forest Guardian's pardon. I mean, if you were aware that people could misunderstand you, you'd probably do whatever you could to mitigate that risk by carefully researching the things you say before you say them, and making sure that you're not making any sort of erroneous claims, or making shit up and convincing people that it's true.
There's also an idea that people might not understand it's satire, and therefore I need to take responsibility for that. Well, You know, when people sort of say, well, maybe people don't think it's satire, it's like, I'm not going to write my work for stupid people. You know, I'm sorry, if you don't know it's satire, I can't help you. A lot of other people kind of often say, you know, it's not quite clear that what you're doing is satire. Well, I'm not going to write it for stupid people. If you can't see that it's a character.
It's especially convenient for Tom Walker if he can write his audience off as idiots every time they receive his work in a way that he doesn't really approve of. Because in this particular video, Pie Walker spreads a lot of misinformation. For example, Walker starts off his whole tirade by referencing a motion within a division of the American Library Association to rename a Children's Literature Award.
Today we'll be discussing Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of the Little House on the Prairie books, whose name has been removed from a writing award because her books display stereotypical attitudes and contain racial language. Well, duh.
Previously, it was named after Laura Ingalls Wilder, but because she and her daughter were noted fucking racists, I mention her daughter because she was heavily involved in the writing process of the Little House series, the ALA removed her name from an award and replaced it with a more generic one. But Pie Walker claims that this is somehow an act of sanitizing history. They stated on their fucking website that the alteration has no reflection on past awards or achievements. He kind of addresses a vague audience and entreats them to stop sanitizing history. But it's not really sanitizing history, is it? All this means is that when this association awards writers from here on out, they're handing out an award of identical function and of a different name.
Oh, look at that. Political correctness did that. Can you believe it?
Besides that, maybe an award that honors and invokes only the good side of Ingalls' legacy does more to neuter the past. Oh my god, the word neuter. An award indiscreetly celebrates what she stood for and everything that she produced, because it doesn't communicate the way that she effaced the true history of the American frontier in her work, to quote Sharon Smulders. And also, isn't this freedom of speech? You've been dunked on, boob.
Let's investigate the claim that the Little House series is only displaying racism, where we cut to a literary segment where I sound like I've been trapped in a yogurt tube for 10 years.
Near the beginning of the video, Pie makes a comparison between the Little House series and other American books like Huckleberry Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird. This is actually a pretty popular comparison. I think it's because Huckleberry Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird are the only American books people can really think of that have the N-word in them. Huck Finn is actually really a pertinent and appropriate example for this specific video because it's a satire, first and foremost. So I know my reading list is going to be super unruly for this video, but I'll recommend another book by a guy called Gerrard just in case you're interested in literary theory or literary studies at all. He wrote a book on something called a paratext. He calls paratexts the threshold to the text, and they're essentially things that can precede or follow the text itself and can prepare the reader to sort of digest the content that they're about to read. One of the paratexts in Huck Finn is priceless, and it goes like this. Persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot. By order of the author, per GG Chief of Ordnance. Mark Twain is, in that instance, preparing us to view the content of his book skeptically. He is asking us to find a moral in it by telling us that he'll shoot us if we try to find a moral in it. To Kill a Mockingbird obviously wasn't satire, but it is meant to function as a commentary on race and racism within American culture. The latter two were meant to critique and comment on race and racism within America. They were supposed to be conversation starters. They're focusing on those subjects. Like, the Little House books aren't just neutrally displaying racism. I don't even know if it's a thing that you can do. The books themselves are kind of an exercise in, like, unbridled sentimentalism.
And this would be like whatever, except for the fact that Ingalls never takes a moment to step back and direct the reader's attention to how racist everybody's being.
The article that I've linked, as well as another book that I'll have down there, actually talk about all the ways that Ingalls changed or altered the actual facts within history. What was going on, though, in Ingalls' childhood was genocide, and you can't really get that sense from children's books. And isn't it convenient how the land is just entirely empty, where the Ingalls family is settling? I got my degree in English. I actually had to read these fucking old races that you people are all arguing about. I had to do the work here. You all get to just complain about it, and I actually had to do... At another point, Walker takes issue with the fact that people complained about the movie Dunkirk not having enough women or people of color in it.
It's set in the English Channel during World War II.
But Pie Walker doesn't seem to be aware that there actually were people of color in the fucking Dunkirk battle. I'll keep this segment short since Lord knows Tom Walker didn't put much time into his own, but I'll have a list of articles down below that you can refer to if you want to know more about black folks living in France and England during World War II and a little bit before. Firstly, because these countries were colonial powers, they often brought over soldiers from their colonies to be deployed on the front, and a lot of those soldiers were not white people. France deployed troops from its colonies in Senegal and Morocco in Dunkirk. The African Division, or Division Africaine, I don't speak French, I'm sorry. Here's the neat thing though. Decades before World War II, Paris was a cultural hub for black Americans. The Harlem Renaissance brought with it a bunch of artists and intellectuals from the black community who were like, fuck this shit and fuck Jim Crow, I'm going to Paris. And there you go, you've got a diaspora. Here's a poster that Britain published within a year after the battle at Dunkirk. In the 1940s, when, if you believe Tom Walker's tone, Britain and France were like homogeneously white, such that casting black or brown people is akin to inserting a dragon made of anal beads into the middle of the ocean during the battle sequence, the British Empire saw fit to project a diverse image of itself and the Commonwealth during the war.
The film Dunkirk was criticised for not having enough women or people of colour in it. It's set in the English Channel during World War II.
When encountering a satire in the wild, it's important to ask yourself the question, if this is a joke, what difference does it make? If the person is trying to ventriloquize their opposition by hyperbolizing them, it might make a difference to know that they're joking, because the content of the joke is dependent on the sort of character they're giving voice to. If the joke is that the person is just shouting and screaming their opinion and also swearing, then it actually might not make a difference if it's a joke.
My generation, right, we've never really had to fight for much. Gay rights certainly has come a long way in my lifetime, but I mean, we never had to fight for the vote. We never had to fight in a fucking war. You know, my grandmother watched the Battle of Britain taking place above her house.
I think he means that the UK hasn't had to fight a war on home soil since World War II, but Pie Walker phrases this as if what went down in Afghanistan didn't go down in Afghanistan.
The Pride fucking sponsored Costa Coffee. Who does this help? Who is that for, exactly? Or are you just cynically hijacking an entire social movement to promote your chain of restaurants by wrapping your corporate brand in rainbow-coloured virtue to help you sell dumplings? Stop politicising my dumplings!
He groups in corporations that are co-opting social justice causes and iconography with the actual activists and movements that these images were born out of. Usually, the exploitation of subcultures or mediums that originate in marginalized groups for the profit of corporations on the outside isn't something that feminists or other activists condone. For more information on that, I'd recommend this book called No Logo by Naomi Klein. She details a bunch of counter-movements and protests that aimed to push back against this exact phenomenon, but that's a whole other conversation. What makes Suppression Obsession even more dubious is this point where Pie insinuates that anyone who identifies racism in the movie Dumbo is a fucking loser.
Vice magazine recently reviewed the trailer for the new live-action remake of Dumbo and said the trailer was, and I quote, cute and heartwarming and seemingly neither racist nor terrifying. News just in, the new Dumbo film probably isn't racist. What on earth made you think it would be? This is what identity politics does to you. It turns your fucking head into blancmange.
And then Walker writes in this line.
Crows? What? I've never seen Dumbo.
In this moment, Walker basically exonerates himself from anything false that his character has said so far. For while Pie may be ignorant about the racism surrounding the crows in Dumbo, Walker is clearly self-aware enough to signal to us that he personally does know. You, the skeptical audience member, might now be an uncertain boy. What Walker is doing here is actually a writing technique sometimes referred to as lampshading. When you lampshade, you can gesture to a prevalent problem within your own work and then move on without actually having to address it in any significant way. This kind of move signals that the artist was considering and anticipating a specific kind of criticism, but instead of working through it or accepting that that criticism is inevitable, the artist is able to just kind of hand wave it away. Is every incorrect thing that Pie says just another example of Walker winking and nudging at us, or is this actually an instance where Walker, not just Pie, made an oopsie? This video is one of Walker's most viewed on Facebook. The general reception illustrates the way that his audience's political biases have been stoked and validated by his simplistic, reductive, dishonest, and incorrect representations of a wide swath of issues. Even though Pie opens his video by conceding that, naturally, it's easier to find racism in books if our sample is from 80 years ago, his concluding sentiment, or rather statement, is that
We used to react to prejudice. Now we actively seek it out, often where it doesn't fucking exist.
So what does his audience think about that? You, sir, are brilliant, and I'm giving you an online standing ovation. This is spot on. We can't hide and forget the past. My partner's a primary school teacher, and they have removed stuff about the wars and the Holocaust from their curriculum. It's stupid. He's saying what a lot of us are thinking. Brilliant, humorous, and totally spot-on rhetoric. Every single word completely and utterly true. Oh my god. Identity politics is everything that's wrong today. Looking for offense or prejudice where there isn't any is dangerous and disharmonious. Let's celebrate diversity. Absolute gold, I swear. With each passing minute, you can almost see the character of Mr. Pie sliding further and further over to the right wing. Righteous lefty middle class are heading for Armageddon in double quick time. Jesus fucking Christ, this is the best one. The SJW anti-fascists are the most fascist of them all, openly attacking, often with violence, those they perceive to be infringing on anyone's rights or possibly offending someone. Fuck.
It sure is hot here in California, where we are. A lot of the people in the comments that I showed you weren't confused about whether or not Tom Walker was producing satire, but the problem is that he was confirming their biases. Can you hear me over the wind? You can stop that. Most of Tom Walker's jokes are built upon a straw man of the left and a lot of other really complex socio-political issues, but knowing whether or not he's telling the truth or lying or just being negligent in his research isn't a matter of being smart or stupid or knowing whether or not he's trying to satirize something. It's a matter of doing 300 hours of unnecessary research for a 6,000 word video script that you end up having to cut down on by 2/3, or just wielding a level of passive knowledge that you can use to corroborate whether or not the things he's saying are entirely accurate. So if the joke in Tom Walker's videos is that it's so true that it's funny, I don't think we're operating on the same conception of what reality is. You're most likely not going to know all the things that you don't know. You've ever heard of Dunning-Kruger? It is a good and healthy idea to fact check every 7-minute video that comes across your newsfeed, but we live in the year of our Lord, the information era. Nobody's got the time for that shit. Is it legal to run around naked here?
You can see this phenomenon elsewhere on the internet too, particularly in the videos of CinemaSins. Sir Bob of Vids demonstrates in his videos about CinemaSins why their form of satire is trash. He points out that CinemaSins Jeremy blends in his own opinion with those of the supposedly satirical, nitpicky asshole narrator character that he plays in the videos that they make. What's more, Jeremy mixes valid criticisms together with what he claims are intentional, self-aware error jokes. The problem for the viewer here is that it's virtually impossible to distinguish the criticism of the film based on facts from the satirical criticisms that address things CinemaSins made up. CinemaSins fails as satire and consequently contributes to an unhealthy discourse around cinema. It's unclear what's being satirized, and the channel deploys the word satire as a defense against criticism and to exonerate themselves from taking responsibility for misrepresenting a film or doing it an injustice. The problem with CinemaSins is that the label of satire belies untruths in their videos and thereby misleads the audience. What's more, CinemaSins seem to categorize their work as satire to diminish or excuse the impact their laziness has on their work and the work of other people. CinemaSins and Tom Walker aren't dissimilar. I'd argue though that while both are lazy and their work lacks merit, Walker is more caustic to the discourse because he presents an air of neutrality while also misrepresenting the issues and or the left generally. Let's go back to Huck Finn. The use of the N-word in the novel is often thought to be ironic. The word was never value neutral, so when Huck uses it against Jim in spite of their newfound friendship, Jim's thoughtfulness, and all the times that Jim stuck his neck out for Huck, it reflects poorly on Huck to say it. Despite our knowledge that the novel is satirical, that the narrative is absurd, and that Twain's use of the N-word is popularly read as commentary on racism in white America, we can still offer some really valid criticisms against Twain and his novel. The N-word also isn't the best transgressive device that a white author could be using to emphasize the hypocrisies and failings of race racist white folks. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that you can know exactly what you're doing, and your execution will still have flaws that people can criticize fairly and legitimately. I've talked about authorship on this channel before, and if you're interested, you should go check that video out. Also, gosh, weren't those the days? Things were a lot easier back then. And I tend to fall into the realm of critical theory learning people who hold that the author doesn't have final say over how the text is interpreted. But that doesn't mean that they can wash their hands of the text at the end of the day. It's impossible to divorce the text from its context, and the author is all a part of that. Knowing about the author and their environment can help us understand subtextual meaning, or simply the themes that a work of art is trying to drive at. So let's get to know Tom Walker a little better. I don't think Tom Walker says any of the things that he does in bad faith. I don't think he completely understands the medium he's working with, though, and I don't believe he entirely grasps the scope of some of the issues that he's tackling. He knows why people watch him.
But that is the key question, first of all. I mean, is Jonathan Pie saying what you think?
We're politically aligned. I mean, we differ about certain... I don't care as much about certain things.
You're not as angry.
I think all that Pie's success is down to one, he vents spleen at Trump and the Tories, and people go, yeah, that's what I think. Oh, but I've articulated it with more swear words.
But he doesn't seem to understand why he does what he does. He explicitly states in one of these interviews that he started making videos to push back against the media's dismissive attitude towards Jeremy Corbyn.
But that is an agenda, isn't it? I mean, your agenda is to correct what you think is a wrongful portrayal of the truth.
I guess so, but also it's not an agenda, it's an interesting satirical take.
Yeah. There is clearly then a serious purpose to what you're doing. I mean, it is fun and it's comedy, but
it's not
you're essentially a serious operator, aren't you?
I consider it every week a piece of work. It's a piece of writing, it's a piece of analysis, or a piece of comedy, or a piece of satire.
What do you think its purpose is?
Satire or what I do?
What you do?
What's its purpose? For me personally, it's a career. When I'm doing my live show and I see old people laughing along with young 15, 16-year-olds, maybe its purpose is it's getting some really young people to really think about politics.
This is the politicisation of art, which of course is the end of fucking art.
I mean, that coming from a political comedian, but whatever. Maybe you see now why Walker's jokes are predicated on false assertions about the world. A lack of forethought about his intentions bleeds into his messaging and his execution. Let me explain a little further. There were numerous points in his interview with Owen Jones where he conceded that, yes, there is a discrepancy in women's pay compared to men's, there is racial and gendered inequality in the world, but those moments contrast with a whole body of work where he vehemently denies those things. And there are even other points where he admits to not knowing how to respond to some pretty basic questions that Owen Jones throws at him.
Free speech, define it. What is free speech?
Well, the freedom to articulate your opinion. If that opinion offends, who gives a shit? I'm sorry. If you were a racist and you genuinely felt that your skin colour made you better than that guy over there with brown skin, you should have the right to articulate it, because then I can tell you where it's going wrong.
Do you genuinely think that racism is something which is a legitimate perspective which can just be debated? Debating whether or not somebody is inferior because of the colour of their skin is simply an unacceptable perspective, isn't it?
It is unacceptable. But to shut someone down because of... I mean, this
what do
is
you
the
mean
real
shut
problem.
them down? That's what I don't understand.
Well,
What do you mean
all
shut
right,
them
but probably a bad example that I gave you.
If I was holding hands with another man walking down the street,
Yeah.
and someone said, "You fucking puffs,"
Yeah.
is that free speech?
No, it's.
But why not? Why isn't that free speech? It seems like you're saying that these are just words and freedom of speech is sacred and you're an absolutist, but then you have accepted there are very clear limits to freedom of speech, that somebody doesn't have the right to say about two gay men that they're, fucking queers. Would you have supported that over interracial marriage? If it was...
Jesus, that's a really good question, isn't it? What, a referendum on?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an awful situation you're putting me in. You had to have a debate about it.
But you wouldn't have done that with interracial marriage.
You've stumped me on that because I just can't. Again, maybe I'm just too naive. I can't imagine not allowing that. Do you know what I mean? To me, it's.
Walker insists that because he's a member of Labour and he is a socialist, he's a leftist, and what he's doing is holding a mirror up to his own side and offering constructive criticism. But Walker also thinks that socialism isn't about the working class anymore. Like socialists are only concerned with gender and race and sexuality and identity politics, as if these things are divorced from class. I think it's telling that as more socialists come to recognize that residing at the intersections of multiple marginalized identities can tend to make you experience economic inequality more acutely, like the ways that gender and sexuality and race can be determinants of class. Walker has started to focus more on the ways that he feels random dudes' freedoms to say slurs are being imposed upon by the state. That's really what socialism's all about, I feel like, right?
And I am a liberal, and I think I'm a good person, and I'm willing to listen to other people's points of view. I'm not suggesting that these inherent privileges don't exist. What I'm questioning is their usefulness in political discourse.
To this, Owen Jones responds that, if you read, you'll find that people's encounters with oppression are clearly real and factual, and thus that talking about these things isn't the same as bringing up some superfluous information.
And the implication when one suggests that I'm wrong because of my sexuality, for example, in those instances, the implication is that
I haven't bothered to read up
on it and I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, maybe I've read everything in the world about it,
and I've come to this conclusion that you disagree with.
I really doubt that he came to his positions after years of reading Du Bois and Butler and Ahmed or Crenshaw or Baldwin or Foucault, and then he was like, you know what? These guys just don't understand. You can't just call everything racist. I suspect that he derives most of his opinions from what he finds online, particularly Twitter and online media outlets. I think this is why he also changes his mind so quickly when interviewers press him. He usually argues purely from emotion, and when he's forced to provide evidence for his beliefs, the connection between these large flaws in the monolith of leftism and the evidence that he actually has is tenuous at best. I'm not showing you these clips to make you think that Tom Walker is a stupid man, but when we try to understand his work as satire, and shift focus to the man who claims to be a leftist holding a mirror up to his own side, what we find in the totality of Walker's portfolio and his commentary on it doesn't show a man who understands the big picture. He's clearly aware that inequality is a thing and that we have to deal with it. He understands that nuance and strongly evidenced positions are necessary for moving things along in a highly bureaucratized system. But I want to illustrate that Walker doesn't seem to have a robust understanding of his own positions. He concedes to Owen Jones that slurs aren't an expression of free speech, but here we have a video saying that, well,
that's his right, isn't it, to use whatever words he chooses? I mean, I'm not saying Linehan wasn't being rude or being a twat. I honestly don't know, but it's up to him what words he uses to describe anyone he likes, just like it's up to anyone to refer to themselves as they so wish. It's called individual autonomy. It's called free speech. Used to be fashionable back in the day, but it seems to me that all some people are asking for is a wider debate on trans issues, and that's something that I would support. And asking for a wider debate doesn't make you a transphobe, but that's not the point, and that's not the point I'm making. The point is, why are the police getting involved in Twitter spats?
Sometimes he recognizes that the Tories and the right have their own goals and that they're actively shaping the world with what power they have.
He was never going to win this. She was never going to lose this. You know, for her, this election was her chance to get rid of the opposition, get a democratically legitimate authoritarian government, you know, like in Turkey. And this for Labour was about attempting to stop Theresa May from steamrolling over every fucking liberty we have by not losing too badly.
But then we have instances where he suggests that the recent proliferation of right-wing extremism is the left's fault?
When the left come out with this shit, we push normal people further and further away to the right by telling them they're already there, by telling people that large swathes of the Tory party are on the far right. You legitimise the far right by putting them all under the same umbrella. It's incredibly dangerous.
At another point, he insists that we need to talk about religion. Not Muslims, no, but we should talk about religion.
This man doesn't represent the Muslim community. Of course he doesn't, but isn't it time to stop pretending that this has nothing to do with religion?
But does he inject this sort of rationality and reason into the discourse around Christchurch? Nope, one retweet. Cool.
What you'll notice in Tom Walker's work is a fixation with what people say on Twitter.
I see people who define themselves as anti-fascist on their Twitter profiles. Who isn't?
And headlines, nothing else, as if the state of these things is indicative of wider leftist movements. Now, let me be serious here for a second, even though the video is already too long. I'm not accusing Tom Walker of radicalizing his audience, and I also think that his medium doesn't exonerate him from conducting his business irresponsibly. Tom Walker does a disservice to the left not because he has criticisms of it, but because he does not understand leftist ideologies, and then proceeds to validate his audience's prejudices. What I am calling for in this video is for this artist to know himself and his targets better before he takes his shots. I've tried to conclude this video like 1,000 times. Does not knowing what you're talking about evolve you into a sacrosanct bastion of rationality? Does joking about things that you're ignorant about render you a transcendental comedian who can wave off all criticism with the mantra that it's just a joke? Tom Walker claims to be holding a mirror up to the left and consequently blames even the failings of the right on the left. Why doesn't Tom apply the same argument to the right in regards to the increased support for specific left-wing groups? If you're going to use a medium that's basically built to make substantive commentary, is your work made funnier when you demonstrate that you don't know what the fuck the medium's for or even why you do what you do? Is Tom Walker a bad guy? That's the end. Comment, rate, and subscribe.